Thanks again, Jaren. Next up, we have Kevin. Super stoked about his talk as well. We've had a lot of Mac security talks here, iOS talks. He's going to be talking about some really cool research, bug exploits he has working on Apple TV. So I don't really know a lot about Apple TV, so I'm also really excited about this talk. So let's give a round of applause.
So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Bradley. I go by Nito TV on Twitter and associated other areas, IRC, Slack, Discord. I've been hacking these devices since the very first Apple TV came out in 2007 and 2008. It didn't do what I wanted to do, so I was like, let's make it do it. Like I saw other people hacking it. I saw they were in the chat room, Awkward TV, and I decided to join in on the fun. I said, why not? It doesn't do what we want, let's make it do it. Fast forward to 2010, and Checkra1n, way too early on that one. 2010, and the second generation Apple TV came out. It had an ARM, there's 6 or 7 processor, pretty sure it was 6, and that meant you're no longer on Intel, because the very first box in 2007 was an Intel machine. It was pretty much a Mac Mini that was shrunk down, so it wasn't really, so it was squished, but then widened. And then you had your HDMI port, your component output, your optical audio, and a USB port, which we made great use of. But now, since it has ARM, everything you've done on iOS up to this point is helpful in some way, but they know nothing about Apple TV. So you had the entirety of the Chronic dev team streaming into the Awkward TV channel because they're like, oh, this is where this is happening. Let's join forces and figure this out. That's how I joined Chronic dev team. Now, what brings me here today, I work for Guardian. If you haven't heard of us, we make an awesome VPN app for the iPhone. We have assorted other things we're doing as well that we're working on that I will go over as well, but that's like the main thing we're known for at this moment. Excuse me. And I've also developed a series of projects, whatever, moving up to this point when Checkra1n, Checkmate, and all that stuff happened. And I'm going to outline that first, and then I'm going to get into the meaty details. That's right. Not used to having to use the remote. So these are some of the projects. These are some of the icons for them. I can look down there too. So you have Ethereal, Reprovision, Air Photo, Breezy, and End Control. I will cover all those in some different form as we move forward. So September 2018. If you aren't familiar with the anvils, I always have to have them in my presentation at least once. I'm usually kind of aggressive and it's every single point. This time I'm like, I don't have time for that. So, but yes, Melissa, they're there. Excuse me. So while working on Nito TV, the App Store for tvOS, so to backtrack a tiny bit, when you want to buy an app or a tweak or anything else on the iPhone, iPad, or things of that nature, when it's jailbroken or just outside of Apple's parameters, you got to go to a jailbroken store. You have Cydia, you have a bunch of different, so Cydia is how it all started. Cilio supports it, Installer supports it. There's a bevy of installers that support it, but for the Apple TV, we didn't have one that had any store infrastructure until the store that I recently released and launched around the same time that this all happened. So I started on the Untitled Controller project working up to this that soon became End Control. And if you've never heard of Controllers for All, what it did is it made it possible for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Wiimote, and can't remember what other controllers, but there's maybe 1 or 2 more, work on your iPhone, your iPad, if you were jailbroken, because you have the MFI program that I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. That you got to be certified for it. It needs to have a lightning port. It has to have these number of buttons. I don't know if the layout is mandated, but either way, it's very strict. PlayStation 4, Xbox One, things of that nature, we're not on the list. Sorry, I realized my laptop wasn't plugged in. Last but not least. So my aim, because the author of that project, I can't pronounce his name properly, so I'm not going to try, but he works for, forgetting the company name. Celebrate. He works for Celebrate now. So since he was too busy to do that, because that is his 9-to-5 gig, that's all he does now, I took over and I'm like, all right, so let's figure out a way to not only make it work on iOS, but make it work on iOS again, tvOS as well. So I started investigating what Matthias Ringwald, he wrote his own custom Bluetooth stack for all of this to work on the iPhone. But what that meant, the side effect of that was that you had to completely tear down the normal Bluetooth stack because you couldn't have two competing ones. So I'm like, all right, we'll just try to use his, make it work on more modern iOS, and then after that, see if it works on tvOS. There's a little tiny problem. The serial remote, that uses Bluetooth. I did not feel like rewriting something or updating BT stack to make that work. Never mind. So plan B from there, which should have actually been plan A if we're being honest, make it work natively. The less dependencies, the better, and it's also harder for Apple to restrict it or break it if you're making things work native. Sorry, they kind of, nope, they're not slow, I'm slow. March 2019. So 3/15/19 was the N-Control tvOS and iOS release. It was soft for tvOS because I didn't have my store up yet, but I was sick and tired of people saying, shut up and take my money. Like, who wants to hear that and like not actually be like, okay. I wanted to launch it all at once, but I couldn't. So I'm like, let's just get it out there. And Patreon, I started a Patreon account, and patrons were the only people that initially could get it for tvOS, but it wasn't like you had to continue contributing. It was like a one-time thing. So buy it and cancel if you want, or if you continue to contribute, it's up to you. There was no requirement. It was just kind of like a thing to get there, to get it in people's hands as early as possible. But yeah, it was essentially, as I mentioned before, the revamped version of Controllers for All, but it works completely natively. So you didn't need BT stack. And I thought it was going to be harder for Apple to break it, but they actually broke it pretty quickly. So we'll get to that later. Oh, and if you want to see more info, that you can go to the wiki. The Awkward TV wiki is the source of truth for all Apple TV jailbreaks. We have maintained it since the very first Apple TV, and I still maintain it to this day. So then, about 10 days later, Apple's like, hey guys, Apple Arcade, it's going to come out. PlayStation 4, Xbox One, all these games, all this stuff. Like, I'm sure you all heard of it at least. So I was like, all right, that's awesome. Thanks, guys. So it kind of felt like this. So at this point, instead of being down in the doldrums and like, oh, woe is me, because this is the thing, like they Sherlock stuff all the time. We have a term for it. It's called Sherlock based on something they called Sherlock when they stole something else. What did they even steal? Or was it, I don't remember the exact story at this point, but it's it's that bad that you should be ready for it. That's the point. That's the bullet point. So thinking of ways, okay, how can I make N-Control attractive again so people still want to buy it? And I hadn't even launched my store yet. I was like, if I launch the store and it has no app, where's the beef? So, excuse me, sorry. People had highly requested it to work with this game called PUBG. And they gave you one joystick support really slowly. So you have your right joystick, which are like pan left and right, up and down. And then the left joystick, as you imagine, is supposed to move you around. They got as far as the left joystick or right joystick, and they're like, we don't feel like doing this. So it's partially there, just the rest of it didn't work, which was nice for me because that's the hardest part. Because the way I made it work, I took it so it was just a screenshot, the screen size, whatever. So it needed some work. It could have been smarter, but it's like, oh, this button is here. Expect them to push here. I'm going to send this command that it expects. So it was just like, it's kind of like actually another product that Matthias made called Blue Control, where you literally would just be like, take a screenshot, you would tell it where the buttons were, and then it would just automatically click those for you through mimic touch events. But since it was such an easy thing and it was such a good template, I decided, why don't I support all of these other things as well? Sorry, I'm modulating a lot. I need to like, all right, anyway. So I was like, okay, Mobile Legends was highly recommended or requested. FIFA was, Pro Evolution Soccer was. So I supported all those as well with very minimal code changes. I cranked all of these out after PUBG was done in maybe like a week. So PUBG took a while because getting it to move around based on navigation for the left control, that was still a disaster. So in August 2019, about 6 months after all of that happened, I finally released the Nito TV store. And if you would like to know more about it, there's an introductory blog post here. And I will be releasing this. It is an app, as you noticed. I'll be releasing it as an app and the slides as well, because what I did is I took a keynote, export it to HTML, and this is loading it through a web view. This is how that app works. So once you first open Neato TV, the first thing you would see is this app store. I tried to make it look as close as what you're used to if you have an Apple TV and you go to the featured section. You go in here, you see the top section, it kind of banners through, it passes through. Those are like the biggest, most important projects. And then everything is just categorized. Gaming is the first one, multimedia is the second. There's other categories below, but this is kind of just to give you the gist of what you should expect if you actually go through this process. End Control is currently the only project for now, but that is going to change in the near future. And initially, you could only pay with Amazon Pay, but there is now PayPal support as well. I will support other developers selling on this because it's no fun if it's just me as soon as possible. That's the next step. That's the next phase for the store setup. So once you actually select a paid product, or any product for that matter, but this is an example of a paid one, you can see you have some info about it. You can say your name, what category it goes in. You can have screenshots below. You can actually have a screenshot to the right as well, but I didn't feel like I needed to go in through every exhaustive detail. Just kind of give you the gist of it. So after this, Checkmate was released, and this is one of the most monumental occasions in the history of this community. I cannot understate how amazing this is. So in late September, 2019 to be exact, Checkmate/iPwn DFU was released by AxiomS. And I just say we should run him for president next. I mean, I'd vote for him. So as I mentioned, there hasn't been anything like this in about 10 years. Shatter and Limerine were the only things that are analogous to it. They were both boot ROM exploits, but they didn't cover as many devices as, I mean, you compare like the A4, and that was all that they could work on. Actually, no, I think Shatter only worked on the A4. No, they both were A4 only, but I think like Shatter even worked on more limited devices than just that. But the Apple TV will support it. So I eventually had to use it because the USB stack between, I think, let's see, what became before Al Capitan? What was ever before that? Those two, like between there, they rewrote it and just broke everything. So I had to actually use it. And it was a lot of work. It was fun, but it was a lot of work. So what you can do with this, the most important part about it is you can pretty much do anything. It's like the Wild West. It's like a renaissance right now. You can dump keys. You can disable KTTR, KPP, PAC, like all of that, gone. And it makes everything so much better. Your phone actually runs better jailbroken now because all those things take cycles to get their thing done, to try and block and see, are you doing stuff you're not supposed to? You get rid of those cycles, you're burning less battery, and your phone and device are actually running better. It's like a miracle. Excuse me. So the third and the fifth Apple TV, or the third through the fifth Apple TV, this exploit applies to all of those. When he released iPwn DFU, it didn't support any of them because he has a lot of devices to support. Like you can see the SoC list, he supported all of those initially. So, I mean, I couldn't begrudge him. So, I mean, he just released the best exploit ever. Nobody could begrudge him. So moving along, while everyone was really buzzing and excited about this, I was really busy working on other things at the same time, playing catch up, so to speak, because I had just launched my store or whatever. So I was excited about it, but I wasn't involved in it. I was discovering the fact that you can unidirectionally, which I will be demoing in a moment, send and receive files with AirDrop on the Apple TV. Why Apple left this out and doesn't let us use it, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. But I wasn't about to let that go sliding. I'm like, that's amazing. There's so much potential. So I released Breezy and Ethereal in really horrible iterations. It used NS distributed notification centers. And if you listened for that notification, you'd be like, oh, I like this file. Somebody else would be like, oh, I also like this file. Thankfully, it was just me in the playground at the time, so it didn't really matter. It was a nice little stopgap just to kind of whet people's appetite. These are the kind of things that are going to be possible. What Ethereal is, it allows you to airdrop videos of pretty much anything that VLC or FFM can play straight to your Apple TV, and they will play immediately. Excuse me. Aside from that, I was also updating Chimera and Electra. So there was a lot of things on my plate. I didn't have time to be working on anything with it. I did it again. don't know why I'm just keeping it in my hand. Okay, so here comes the airdrop demo. So I was going to try and demo it through this app, and I had it working a moment ago, and then it tripped up again, but I still want to show you what it looks like. So because I'm doing this through an Apple TV, and I wasn't anticipating having this awesome screen down here, I rolled my own thing into AirMagic, and what AirMagic is, it's a web server that runs, and it just listens for a few different get commands, like remote up, remote down, whatever, and it'll do that for the remote. It'll move it left, it'll move it right, so your Apple TV can support anything that supports a web browser, curl even, to do the navigation. So I took AirMagic, and I'm like, well, why don't I just augment that and have it do some extra commands that it listens for through maybe a different web server, because AirMagic is kind of old and not my best code base, and listen for a few other things like, current slide, next slide, what are the things that I'm looking for? You're like, what am I working with? So to demonstrate it better so I don't just sound like a crazy person, I'll just show you what it looks like after I airdrop it. Okay. So if all goes well. Oh, and also, I tried to implement it the same as you expected anywhere else. So if you airdrop to this and other things support photos, which AirPhoto does, it can also accept it. But we want Checkra1n TV to do it instead, and there you go. So that is an example of AirDrop working on the Apple TV, accepting it. Pretty cool, right? I was very excited about this. I was like, why aren't they letting us do this? So I'll press menu, get rid of it. Oh, tell me that. What the? It's still showing up there? That's weird. This one I don't think is my fault. Oh, it probably triggered something over there. Sorry, guys. The Siri one is really finicky, so I only trust this one. I'll make sure I keep it down here. Thank you. So it actually was still my fault. Never mind. Sorry, guys. So on to the juice, the meat, the whatever, the best part of the talk, the thing that you're here for. I actually didn't make sure the speaker works, so I should figure that out in a second, but we'll get to that. So on to Checkra1n. There we go. Okay, so this is the first iOS tvOS, whatever, anything, I guess T2 as well now. He did that stuff while I was working on this talk. I wasn't even aware of when he was working on it until he announced it. I'm like, that's pretty cool. But it's the first iOS jailbreak using Checkmate to actually, because nothing else used it. It was just kind of like a proof of concept, like this is the cool stuff you're capable, but this actually put it into production and released it out into the public and could be used end to end to do the whole Megillah. At the beginning of it, I was not doing any coding because it didn't work on the Apple TV at all. So my main job at that point was just debugging. And if this plays automatically, that's going to be awesome, because since it's not loading through a web server and it's loading locally, it's a little finicky. So give me 1 second to get this movie coming properly. So I'm actually going to use Cycrypt right now while SSH in to get this moving. There we go. So when I was first doing this, I was using an iPhone 6s Plus, and I was filming the screen of my TV to get them debug output. I'm not kidding you. But wait, it gets better. Look at this next log. Did you get any of that? So, challenge accepted. The first thing that we ran into is, as part of stage 2, I can't get into too much detail until it's completely open source, but as part of stage 3, or at the end of stage 2, somewhere in that line, it looks for a status check and it runs it. I don't remember exactly why it runs it, but it does. It doesn't check to see, or I'm sorry, it didn't check to see at the time, does this binary exist? They assumed it existed, I can talk, on iOS. It'd be on tvOS. Didn't even think to look. It didn't. So when you try to run a binary that wasn't there, based on the code and the way it worked, it just completely shut down and crashed, and we had no idea why. So once that roadblock was, basic words sometimes. Once we got past that roadblock, the next one was that for anything on the iOS or tvOS with ARM64 could use the same binary before this day. You could take an ARM64 binary and then just run it on tvOS. If all the frameworks are there and all the DLL cache stuff is in place, it would work flawlessly. With 13, that all changed. They got very strict about this. Like, you can no longer do this. And we didn't know that. So that was another one of those things. So like, since we're doing this while 13 is still kind of fresh and very fresh for tvOS, it hadn't even been jailbroken yet. There's a lot of new things we're looking into that we have no clue about because nobody's figured it out yet. We're blazing that trail to get to the next plane, to next zone, so to speak. Also, I still actually have no JTAG or serial on my Apple TV 4, none. So debugging stuff, especially when working on Checkra1n, is very, very, very challenging. So when I finally got a monitor to do this, to film, and that was like the main reason I bought it. I mean, it wasn't the main reason, but it was the reason I bought it that day. It got a tiny bit better. I mean, this part's still the same. We hadn't made the frame buffer smaller, which is another challenge because once it gets past the screen, you're like, I don't know what it's doing now. Excuse me. So yeah, once it's past the ASPS support, then does it get to the next step? I mean, we know because we see these next logs, but they're still not that much better filming from this monitor. So that was still very, very challenging to debug. The next hurdle that I had to overcome was there's no loader we needed a specific loader that was different from iOS for tvOS. And there was a few different reasons this was the case, and I'm going to outline them now. So we don't have multiple package managers. Nito TV is the only game in town. So there's no need to have a bunch of things to choose from if there's only one. Like, why are we going to make the user press an extra button if it's just going to be what we choose for them automatically anyway? Why even have a button? There is also a different payload. And the reason this is because things are just different on Apple TV. You don't have the same frameworks. The UI doesn't work the same. You know, the buttons are essentially the same. UI kit is mostly the same. There's augmented parts and there's also parts missing. So all these things combined together, you shouldn't even try to combine the code base for the iOS and tvOS loader. You're covered with a bunch of if-defs, and it's just, you know, it's dirty code, and nobody really wants to do that. The post-installation flow was different as well. So on Apple TV, it still uses, or not still because iOS never did, it uses code injection to get your icons showing up on the screen. It's messy, I don't like it, but I still haven't found a way around it yet. So that's another thing that we had to overcome and figure out a way around because, as I'm going to mention later, tvOS 13 added additional challenges to this plate as well. And on top of that, I had to make a control center widget. So tvOS 13 introduced Control Center for the first time ever on Apple TV because we didn't have it before. So I was like, all right, how do we get our plugins there? Well, one, how do we write plugins? And two, how do we get them in there? It's actually really easy. You just put them in this folder, code sign them, they're good to go. And the way I added another domain is normally you can only do system library. Now you can do library. I felt it was good to keep them separate. What if somebody else names something sleep or names something else Apple's already used? If you overwrite them, you're going to have a bad time. But I decided, since I discovered this around the same time, let's make a Checkra1n widget. If the loader doesn't open up automatically because it has to, because it's still invisible, they can just go into the control center, open it up, the loader will kick off. So it was kind of like a stopgap, but also it kind of looks cool. So obviously you can see the arrows pointing to it. It stands out, obviously. So the next step, how do these things work? I took the sleep module that was already in there that you probably saw on the previous screen, and I just class dumped it and started reversing it. It was very simple. I didn't imagine it was hard. It should call one command, sleep, wherever it does, or wherever it did at the time. And you have the content view. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll start with the button style. You have three different, small, medium, and large. The small is kind of a square that doesn't even fill up the entire like control center section. And then the medium does fill up half of it, and then the large fills up the whole thing. So for the Checkra1n, you don't really need like the whole size. So it was just the medium one. The next up is the content view controller. And that just tells you what does the button look like? What image is it showing? Does it have text on it? Things of that nature. It's pretty humdrum. I made it a template image, so if you go between light and dark mode, it'll still work. Let's see here, handle action. That's what happens when you click the button. And dismiss after action. So if you don't have that as true, the control center will stay up until it automatically goes away from being idle or whatever, as long as you want it to. So if you want it to go away afterwards, dismiss after action, true. Okay, yes, that's right. So about the hidden section, or the hidden issue, if you add any of these tags I tried to figure out this entire process, and it was just too much reversing. I had too many boards, all the boards they have, like pine board, backboard, headboard, splashboard. Let's see, there's a few, but all of those things, it's not just those things as applications. They have daemons, they have frameworks, they have helpers, they have so many different things that you have to reverse to figure out this process. As far as I got, so PB application, so to back up a tiny bit, you don't have Springboard on iOS. We have Pineboard and Headboard. Those are like those two apps combined give you everything you expect from Springboard, but on the Apple TV. So PB application, obviously, is Pineboard application. So the shared info store, the policy that you get from there, the exclusion tags are the exact same as the PBS exclusion tags in LS application workspace. I think I hit pay dirt on this at one point a while ago, and I just didn't remember exactly where it was. So I know that somehow those variables, those instances interact at some point, and that's where Pineboard gets it from in LS application workspace, and it stores it in this array. How it gets there, I haven't completely figured that out yet. But hopefully once I do, that'll get rid of the whole code injection thing. The reason this is important is if you have any of these three tags inside of SB app tags in your info plist, they don't check anything about your application except if it's code signed. So it'll get right through the door, does not matter. But there's a caveat, you can't see it. Kind of a bummer. So here's an actual demo. I have to play this video the same way I did the other ones. Let's hope it works out. Oh, did it play itself? Nope. Okay. Here we go. So this is what you see after you plug in, or after you run Checkra1n on your Apple TV. Once it reboots, after you see like the loader and everything else and all the text up there, it goes to this very quickly. Like you'll see your home screen for 1 second, and then this will pop up automatically, start downloading. After it downloads, once it's done, the first thing you'll see immediately, well, not immediately, but within like 30 seconds is Nido TV. So end to end, end to end, after you do this, the next thing that happens, as far as you know as a user, you don't touch anything. You just get Nido TV immediately. So I tried to make it a pretty seamless process. Big money, no whammy, no whammy. Stop. And there's the light mode version. Thank you. Thank you. So some of the issues that I mentioned a moment ago with the UI cache obstacles, you still need code injection. And on top of that, tvOS 13, as I also mentioned, it had an extra challenge added. It had another layer of protection it went through for you to be able to see the app. So I had to figure out what that was. Thankfully, it was really, really, really easy. So as you see at the very top, that was the way I did it up to 12. So 9 through 12, this was sufficient with the code injection. I don't even think 9 or 10. Actually, 9 and 10 didn't need it at all. 11 and 12 did. And then 13, PB app info is enabled true. Done. Yeah, I got to get there. There's me being, a little dirty on Twitter. I had to get bleeped. So one of the things that was another issue with this, because there's so many issues piled on top of each other, is mobile substrate. We use that for code injection again, because when I worked on Chimera and Electra before this, we used Substitute instead. And Comex made an open source version of mobile substrate that's called Substitute. Nobody ever really adapted till this point, so it's still missing things. It was and still is missing things that mobile substrate had long had. But since I couldn't get any kind of code injection working, because that all worked based on stuff I'm not going to get into today, there's just too much, I had to use this old method, which was possible again, to get code injection working. So I took the Pineboard app, renamed it to Pineboard Bro, and then made it a shell script in place of it that was executable. And then when I resprung everything, it would just give me code injection. It would work again. This is something we hadn't been able to do in a long time because nobody really bothered to do all the patches necessary. We didn't need to make as many, I don't think, just because the virtue of the awesomeness of Checkmate. So 10/16/19, it was the very, very first day that Checkra1n had worked on an Apple TV for, and it was awesome. It was a labor of love that took a very long time, and it was a very exciting day. The very next day, I decided to tease the pins that we had found. So based on some stuff I'll kind of get a little bit into in a moment, we found out that the Ethernet port has a trap door inside of it that has some pins exposed that some special cables can get to, or some enterprising people can figure out how to do stuff with otherwise. And it turns out this is from the iFixit teardown. They completely missed these pins. These pins are on the Ethernet port, and they connect inside of that trap door. But we didn't give that whole reveal at this point. We just teased these pins, and people just started guessing because it was fun. On the 22nd, we had the first diags. It wasn't serial, but we had some kind of diagnostic output. Like when you plug something in iRecovery and iBoot comes up, or it's not even in recovery mode. It has to be in maybe DFU. In DFU mode, you'll get this whole printout that you'll see in a minute that says iBoot, your serial number, CPID, DDID, all that stuff. So that was the first time at that point. We also got that as well on the 4K. Let's see. Oh, and the code injection I showed on the previous slide. This is probably going to be my favorite part, but I can't talk as much about it as I'd like to. So allegedly, on this day, a piece of sandpaper, and not like one of those things that you professionally put down on it, an actual piece of sandpaper might have gone directly onto a NAND inside of an Apple TV, allegedly, to get it into DFU mode. To back up a tiny bit, normally on any Apple TV, up until the 4K, you press menu play pause on this, on the serial mode as illustrated in the picture, to get it into DFU mode. As long as you're plugged into USB, which is also an issue because they don't give it, they took it away. But as long as you're in there and it's powered on, that should kick it into DFU mode. On the 4K, it does not. So we found out you can get into recovery mode still with this redacted device that I really can't get into, that I may or may not have. You could get into recovery using a special version of the mobile device that Nikias had put together that had Wi-Fi support. He hadn't released it at the time. He may have by now. I'm honestly not sure. We figured out it does see it in recovery mode, but the next question, does it see it in DFU mode? Once we know it sees it in DFU mode, we know game over. We own this thing for life. Oh, when we did it, we did verify that DFU mode worked. I guess I should have said that too. So a friend of mine that follows me on Twitter decided, if you're not familiar with the Virgin and Chad meme format, I'm hoping everybody is. I don't have to explain it, do I? Okay, nobody said anything. Okay, good. So this kind of explains itself. Red Snow was a way that things were jailbroken back in the day that nobody really uses anymore, so they thought it'd be funny if that was the Virgin and the Chad was supposedly me, supposedly sanding nans. So then from here, I decided to have some fun with Radian. He is the head of security for Apple. I think software and hardware. I could be wrong. I know definitely hardware though. And have a little fun with him. Show him a picture of stuff in DFU mode. Add the little eyeball emojis. Those come in later too, because I needed those later to find these tweets. The next thing here, you can see there's the diagnostics I was speaking about earlier. So you have the iBoot info. You can verify based on all these things except the redacted serial number that this is indeed an Apple TV 4K in DFU mode. From here, you can see the first time that little Steve ran it on the 4K. And if you actually take a good look, you can kind of see his outline, like taking the picture. And then, of course, I had to point out my name. They're very tiny. There I was. Oh, and you can also see here, this is a good illustration. Remember how it was really big when the frame buffer like kind of went off the screen? This is how we solved that issue. Make it smaller. So moving on to the 4K stuff, and little Steve and some people from Celebrate, I Hate Snow, and some other people put amazing amounts of effort into isolating where these pins were, because there's a ton of different pins. We don't have any kind of any kind of blueprints on how these things work. There's a proper term for that I can't think of. We didn't have any of that stuff. Like none of that stuff is leaked, as we know of, for any of the Apple TVs. So it was kind of just like, hey, test this pin, test this pin, test this pin. It was very challenging, and he went through an amazing amount of work and dead Apple TVs to get what he did done. As you can see here, so this was him actually spilling the beans on, if you pull that down, there you can see the trap door, there's the pins, and presumably we can get DFU and everything else through these things. We just haven't figured out how yet. This is an example of his first generation of the breakout board. And all this does, I say all this does is if it's like a small thing. You press that button, you get in DFU, you run Checkra1n, you have a jailbroken 4K. This is the first version of any of this that has ever worked or ever existed. We obviously want to move more towards something that doesn't have the necessity to solder stuff or take it apart at all. We want to be able to actually utilize that port that we teased just a moment ago. So I'm literally just going to read these verbatim because he wrote the slide for me. So I don't even need to read it. I'll just kind of just go through it and say what I can about it. But the first things that he was doing to trying to get into DFU mode didn't succeed to get it into DFU in any kind of useful way at all. I think it was AOP that would get in the way. So you would boot into DFU, and then within, I think, 10 to 15 seconds, it would panic and then just go straight back to user land to just normal mode. So I think that, the third time, it was the third time that he did that. He had two different times. The first one, no DFU. The second one, it was an illegitimate DFU. And then the third was he used the PCIe set an NVMe to enter DFU with no discernible side effects. So this is the way that he figured out, these are the things that you need to touch in this fashion with whatever crazy technical equipment to get this thing in DFU mode. Any further technical explanation will have to be on another day when he gives a talk about it. And as we move towards products that will be easier for people to use, so you don't need a soldering iron, keep your eye on guardianapp.com for more information on that. So the aftermath, I was absolutely consumed with tvOS 13 support because we were working on the jailbreak at the same time that I was just being introduced to how tvOS 13 is different in the first place. I had a ton of things to do. I had a lot of stuff to update. There was much work to be done. So part of that was the fact that Electra and Chimera used Substitute for code injection, but Substrate was used on Checkra1n. So I didn't have to split it into two separate apt repos, but running an apt repo really isn't my specialty. I can do it. I've been doing it for a long time, but I'm no expert at it. Like Sam Binger, he's much better expert at this, and that's why I tried, and I actually didn't try. I started to migrate over to Electra Broadus, because at that point, I don't have to manage app and depackage anymore. Any of those things with the repo, just my own packages and just the stuff for the store. And also at that point, then it would be merged with how the rest of Checkra1n works, because they use his repo, I want to use his repo too. There's just a lot of things to sort through, and I don't want to rush it out because I'm not doing that anymore. Oh, that's empty. So next slide. So here, because up to this point with Apple TV hacking, there's been other people involved, but I've kind of, not to be boast about it, but I kind of single-handedly kept the thing alive for a very long time, releasing most of the projects on my own. So at this point, since all this stuff had happened, a few other people started getting interested. Now we have theming. As you saw when the big reveal came when the Apple TV opened, there was theming on the Apple TV. So SparkDev introduced that. He ported his version of his snowboard theming engine over to tvOS, and he's done a beautiful job with it. It still needs a little bit of tweaking for tvOS 13, but for the most part, it works perfectly. And then, I don't know if this is going to demo properly. Hopefully the audio is going to work. Let me plug it in. But the next slide is going to be me demoing something from I Killed Apple called Harlem Shake TV, which is only a demo can explain it. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over my class part. So I've been talking about this for a long time, and I've been promising, and it is still coming, just more things have come up. I'm going to be teaching a free class on everything I know how to do on the Apple TV and everything I've ever known how to do, completely free, no strings attached, hopefully as soon as possible. Like hopefully this month, by latest next month, it will absolutely start. I don't know the full format of it yet, and this talk isn't about that, but I will say briefly, it'll probably be like a video every couple of weeks, and then a forum and maybe Discord or one of those kind of things where you can just group together. I'll have time every couple of days that I'll devote just to that to answer questions. So that's kind of something that I want to launch, and I want to let people know about it because I really want to get people involved. Okay, so instead of showing a video here, I want to actually demo it in action. And I don't think this is paired right now, so give me 1 second to make sure that's going to work. Oh, it is connected. Okay, so hopefully, let me put this in here. So hopefully, this just works. Fingers crossed. Is that it? There we go. It is not. We are not getting audio. Damn it. Maybe if I.
Connected to guest room.
Oh, there it is. So I'll just have to do whatever he did in that movie. Oh, I didn't plug it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll plug it back in. Well, it's almost over anyway. Oh, I should have used the mic. Sorry. You get the idea, though. It's not useful, but it's cool as hell. And the next slide was just questions. So, questions? Oh, sorry. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the conference. Thank you for bringing me here, Guardian. Love you all. Questions?
Does this persist, or do you have to, every time you power on the device?
What do you mean?
Like Checkra1n, does it persist?
Oh, no, it doesn't persist. No. You got to do it every time.
But your Apple users power on.
One of the things I wanted to do as a one more thing is I bought a Raspberry Pi for this. I wanted to make it so I could have an untether on the Apple TV using a Raspberry Pi. Because it's totally possible, but I just didn't get it done in time. So that's going to be one solution. Obviously, that isn't the best size of something. I mean, it's okay for the Apple TV. It's tucked behind something. You don't have to worry about looking at it. But obviously, you want something more minimal, and we're going to work towards that. But we got to get it working in some form first, proof of concept, and then move forward from there. So. I don't see why it couldn't work. I haven't played with it, but completely feasible. For Checkra1n, I think like 30 megs, 40 megs, something like that, if even that. Good question. I'm hoping we can use some of that amazing text loading stuff we heard about earlier.
Yeah. All right, awesome. So we're running a few minute by schedule.
Sorry
so
about that.
not to cut off Kevin, but again, round of applause. Incredible iOS.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.